Yo, what is up, my friends? My name is Danny, and today we are going to be discovering all of the features of Datamosh 2, the only way to Datamosh inside of After Effects. Datamoshing is the process of tampering with media compression algorithms in order to achieve visual effects. So, literally breaking video files. Two of the ways that we can do this are by removing a video's iframes and by manipulating its motion vectors. Datamosh 2 packages up all of the tools and then some to tame these uncontrollable glitches. It ships with a simple to use marker workflow, 2 brand new moshing engines, 16 times more tracking precision, and 60 plus built-in moshing algorithm presets. She's loaded up. Getting started with Datamosh 2 is easy, and we can create our first mosh by going ahead and clicking this plus button, setting our in and out points, and then clicking the Datamosh button. Our work area is rendered out, sent to the moshing software in the background, and then inserted back into our timeline. Before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's go over the Datamosh 2 user interface. At the top of the panel, you will find the Remove Frames checkbox, and when toggled, this allows us to add markers that indicate which frames we would like to be deleted from a scene. Below the Remove Frames toggle, we have the Mosh Module section, and this allows us to accomplish the second form of data moshing, which is altering motion vectors. In order to use this section, let's go ahead and click the plus button, which will make a new Mosh Module and also a correlating Mosh marker in the timeline. On the left of this Mosh Module, we have the drop-down button, which reveals the remaining parameters of the Mosh Module, and we'll go over these in a further bit. In the middle, we have the drop-down selection, and this has over 60 different moshing algorithms that we ship with, and we'll be adding more with every single update. To the right of that, we have a delete button, and this will delete the Mosh Module from our panel, and also the Mosh marker from our timeline. Below the Mosh Module section, we have the Datamosh button, and clicking this will actually Datamosh our scene. It will go ahead and render out our work area, and then look at the markers to do the moshing. So let's go ahead and click this button, and it's going to go through and render out our work area, do the moshing, insert our clip back into our timeline here. And now we will be presented with a new option, which is to use the previous render. So if we just want to make some changes to our moshing parameters here, we can go ahead and make these changes and leave this previous render button toggled, and it will use the previously exported video from After Effects to then Datamosh again. Now, if you make any changes to your After Effects composition, like changing the times or adding any new effects, you will need to re-render your scene in order to Datamosh the updated composition. So you will need to leave this unchecked. When in doubt, leave the Use Previous Render toggle unchecked. On the right portion of the Datamosh 2 panel, we have some tab buttons for Home, Settings, and Information. Inside of Settings, you will find some various inputs that we will be going over further, and there will likely be more added here as the project continues to grow. Inside of Information, you'll find some further information about the Datamosh 2 project, including some credits to FFmpeg and FFglitch by Ramiro Pola. FFglitch is an open source bitstream editor built off of FFmpeg, and this is a project that allows us to do all of the motion vector manipulation inside of Datamosh 2. So if you're looking for a command line open source option to Datamosh, check out this project by Ramiro because it's super cool. Up top, we have buttons to launch the in-app tutorial, to open a support ticket, to check out our Instagram, and I highly suggest that you do check out our Instagram because it is pretty spicy. Shameless plug, okay? To the right of that, we have the shop button, and this will take you to the plug and play product page. When we remove a video's iframes, the result is the previous frame's pixels being injected into the following video's motion. So Datamosh 2 comes with a workflow to accomplish just this. Let's start off by clicking the Remove Frames toggle, and then let's add a new Mosh marker by clicking this plus button. This will add a new Remove Frames marker to our timeline that we can then drag to our new scene. This is where the iframe is usually going to occur in a video, is at the beginning frame of a new scene. Now that we have that remove frame marker in place, let's go ahead and click the Datamosh button. Datamosh will render out our work area, throw it in the background moshing engine, and then inject our new Mosh video into our timeline. As you can see, we've got some pretty trippy results here from this iframe removal effect. And if we have multiple cuts or multiple new scenes in our video, we can always add more of these markers or take them away. Datamosh 2 comes with a modular workflow attacking these motion vectors. So let's go through and let's add a new Mosh module via this plus button again. And as you know, this will also add a marker to our timeline. If we go to the modules drop-down selection, we can see the 60 plus different moshing algorithms that we can use to up our motion. And also, as I mentioned, we will be adding more to this list with every single update. So keep your eye out for that. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select average, and then let's do average previous 3. And this will average the 3 previous frames to spit out our ending mosh effect here. Now I can go ahead and add as many of these modules as I would like, and each module will affect the duration of the clip underneath in its own specific way that ties to the module. But for now, let's just focus on this average previous 3 one. Now let's go ahead and set the in and out points of this mosh marker and then also of our timeline. And then let's go over to the Datamosh button and hit Datamosh. This will render out our work area, mosh it in the background, and then at the end of the day, it will insert the mosh clip back into our timeline right here. And as you can see, this moshing algorithm is taking the previous 3 frames of the video, averaging the motion of them, and then using that number as the new motion for the current frame. So a lot of behind the scenes work here, but it's all being taken care of by this moshing algorithm. Now, if we go ahead and drop down this Mosh module, you will find some additional parameters that we can use in this marker's mosh. So the first one that we're going to be going over is the hold frames toggle. And when toggled, this will produce a very similar effect to the first version of Datamosh. It will take the first frame of the marker and it will repeat that frame for the duration of the marker. So let's go ahead and leave this hold frames toggle toggled. And then also I'm going to be using the previous render, since the only thing that I have changed is going to be this hold frames effect, and I don't need to render out the whole video again. Anyways, once I have those things done, I'm going to hit the Datamosh button, and instead of rendering out a new video, it's just going to be taking the previously rendered video and moshing that with our new mosh settings, which is to use the hold frame. Now, in this new render, as you can see, it's going to have this one frame repeated over and over and over again. As you can see like that, this is a very similar effect to the first version of Datamosh. And this is in contrast to the version where we do not have hold frames toggled, which looks a lot more like live motion. Now, you may have noticed that when we toggled this hold frames effect, we also were presented with this new inject frames effect. And this inject frames effect goes hand in hand with the hold frames effect. And what it does is, instead of just cutting in these hold frames into our render, this toggle will inject the hold frames into our final render. So let's go ahead, have this inject frames button toggled. I'm also going to be using the previous render again, since the only thing I'm changing is in the mosh effects and nothing to do with the composition. And then I'm going to hit the Datamosh button. Again, it's going to use the previous render. It's going to mosh that in the background with our new mosh effects. And then it's going to insert that new mosh into our timeline. And as you can see, this new mosh is a lot longer in length than our previous moshes. And to be exact, it's actually the exact length of this marker longer. And that's because instead of Datamosh just cutting in those new hold frames, it's actually going to be injecting them into the clip. And so that means that this provides a much more seamless, if you will, cut here to transition back into the normal video. Moving right along, you can see that we have inputs for intensity, acceleration, blend, and threshold. Intensity allows us to affect how intense the moshing algorithm will be on the video's motion vectors. So let's set this to be 200. let's also get rid of the hold frames effect. And again, I will be using the previous render. I'll hit Datamosh. And now, as you can see, this new effect is going to be a lot more intense than the original version that we had without the hold frames. Acceleration allows us to accelerate the intensity over the duration of the marker. So let's go ahead and let's set the acceleration to be something crazy like 200. I will change the intensity back to 50, and then again use the previous render and hit Datamosh. Now in this new Mosh, the acceleration is going to be affecting the intensity starting at the beginning of the marker and ending at the end of the marker. So you should be able to see how the intensity accelerates over the duration of the marker here. The blend input allows us to combine the original motion vectors from the video with the new moshed motion vectors in a weighted way. So this allows us to retain some of the motion from our original video while still having a lot of the moshing going on. So for this demonstration, I'm going to set the intensity back to 200. I'm going to set the acceleration to 0. And just to demonstrate how this really affects the ending mosh, I'm going to set the blend to 90 or 90%. And that means that it's going to take 90% of the original motion vectors from the video and combine it with 10% of the new Mosh motion vectors. So let's go ahead and hit Datamosh. I still have the previous render button checked. And as you can see in this new video, there's only a little bit of moshing going on, and that's only because we have the blend set all the way up to 90, right? If we had the blend set back down to 0, we would still see that crazy intensity coming through. But since the blend is so high, we are retaining a lot of the original video's motion vectors. The threshold input acts as a gatekeeper and decides whether or not a pixel will be moshed. It decides this based on the pixel's motion vector speed. So we can tell Datamosh to only mosh pixels that are only going faster than a certain speed, and we can also tell Datamosh to mosh pixels that are only going slower than a certain speed. So for this example, I'm going to be using some new footage, and I'm also going to be changing the intensity to 100. Actually, let's change it to be -100. You can enter in negative numbers into the intensity, and it will do the inverse of the effect. I'm going to change the actual moshing algorithm to be move vertical, and then blend, let's set that to be 0, and threshold, let's set this to be 10. So with the threshold being set at 10, we are telling Datamosh to only mosh pixels if they are moving faster than 10. Now that we have this set up, I'm going to uncheck this previous render because I'm using new footage in the composition and I need to render that out. Now, once we have this all set up, let's hit the Datamosh button. Again, we're going to render this new clip out, mosh it in the background, and then insert it back into our scene. And as we can see here, the only pixels that are being moshed in this example are pixels that are traveling faster than 10. All of these stationary pixels are not being affected because their speed is not high enough. It's only the vehicles moving that are moving faster than 10 and are therefore moshed. Now, if we want to do the opposite of this effect, right, we want to mosh pixels that are only traveling slower than 10. Well, we can change this threshold to be a negative number. So we'll do -10 here. And now let's go ahead and select the use previous render since we have already rendered out this scene, and let's hit Datamosh again. All right, in this new render, we're doing the exact opposite of what we were doing in the previous version, where in the previous version, we were telling Datamosh to only mosh pixels if they were traveling faster than 10. This time around, we're telling Datamosh to only mosh pixels if they are traveling slower than 10. So as you can see, all of these cars are still moving throughout the scene, but all of these stationary pixels are being affected by the mosh. Another thing to consider when using the threshold input is this setting called accelerate threshold. When toggled, this will tie the threshold to the acceleration. So as acceleration increases throughout the duration of the marker, the threshold will start to decrease, thus allowing more of the scene to be moshed. New to Datamosh 2 is the ability to take the motion from one clip and transpose it into the motion of another clip. It's crazy. So in order to do this effect, let's go ahead and make a new Mosh module. Inside of the drop-down selection, let's go to experimental and then go to swap. Once we choose swap, we're going to see a new layer and a new marker made on that layer. And this new marker is going to be a donor marker. It's going to signal where in the timeline we should take the motion from. So I have this footage of some coffee beans falling into a machine, and I'm going to take some of the motion here. So I'm going to take, maybe this duration right here. And then going back to my swap marker, as you can see, this is on top of some footage of a drag queen, I think. And we are going to set the in and out points of this swap marker to signal where we want this donated motion to come into the footage. So I'm going to say maybe right there looks pretty good. Now, if we go to the Mosh module dropdown, you can see that we have some different inputs here. Blend is something that we are familiar with already. And as you can imagine, it does something very similar. It will blend the motion from the original footage with the incoming motion vectors from the donor footage. Fade in will fade in this effect, and then fade out will fade out this effect. We'll just leave those at 0 for now. And let's leave blend at 50 as well, and then let's go ahead and click Datamosh. So it's going to render out that original work area, and then it's going to render out the donor section. Now in the background, it's taking the motion vectors from the donor section, and they're going to be averaged, because we use the blend, with the motion vectors of the original footage here. So as you can see, oh man, that's pretty dang trippy, isn't it? So this can be a very powerful effect. Obviously there's, the sky's the limit, so please use your imagination as much as possible. I think that there's going to be some really amazing content made with this effect specifically. All right, now that you have a pretty good general idea about how Datamosh works, don't be afraid to just go crazy. Datamosh can handle a lot, so be not afraid to go ahead and just add a bunch of different effects, experiment. You want to be able to try as many different types of moshes as you can to just dial in what you're really looking for. There are 60 plus different moshing algorithms that we have built in here, and to try to take advantage of a lot of them. They all do different stuff. We're constantly adding to this list, and there's always going to be more room to experiment. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a bunch of these mosh markers here. I'm thinking right about there is going to be a good spot to do some type of Y multiplication. So let's go to spatial, and then I'll do multiply by Y. And I'm actually going to have this accelerate here too, maybe with a 10 there. Drag this guy out a little bit. Inside of here, I think this one I want to mirror the bottom, and I'm actually going to make this an hold frame and inject frame right here. And at the beginning here, I'm going to go ahead and go to spatial again, and then I'm going to multiply by inverse, let's do inverse X and Y, and we can leave that at 50 there as well. Let's see, maybe render to about here and hit Datamosh. Okay, so that just popped out here, and sometimes it takes a second for Datamosh to go through and mosh everything, but look at this. I mean, it's freaking crazy. This is done in one take here, one Datamosh with all these different markers we were able to accomplish. That's some pretty cool stuff. Especially, I love this multiply by Y here with all of these cars going by. You really get to see just how freaking crazy all of this, all these pixels are going down there. So cool stuff, very cool stuff. Don't be afraid to experiment. Try new effects all the time. We'll be adding them, and we look forward to what you all put out there. I hope that I was able to give you all some insight into how the tool works. We have spent many months working on the second iteration, and I really do feel like it is quite a step up from the first version. Thank you everyone who helped to make this become a reality. We hope that it continues to keep pushing this art medium forward. And hey, we already have plans in motion for adding additional features. So get in now and let's ride this pixel wave, baby. Okay, all right. This has been Danny with Plug and Play.